Hi, everybody. This is Janet Belsky, and I'm on to episode 3 of the relationships part of my lifespan lecture series. And today we are going to talk about that wonderful relationship called parenthood. So let me share my screen. Okay, so here we have an emblem of what parents are, which is they really are driving us as a baby to become full adults. I'm going to tell you all about the truth now. Well, why exactly do we want children? I remember when I was a baby, when I was very young, not a baby, I said, I want to give love to somebody. I can't wait to have a child. Children satisfy that basic need, and we've been calling that need in our language called generativity. Children give incredible meaning and focus to life. Is that true? Children will take care of us in old age. Is that true? And the answer to all of these, as you will find out, is true. Moving right along to some stereotypes. Parents. Parents were more devoted in the good old days. Now, many of us say, gee, today's parents, they don't really care about their kids. They spent more time with them in the past. Second idea, if you're a world-class parent, you're going to have a successful child. I think many of us believe that if I'm the best possible parent, my child is going to be successful. Parents are the most important influence on how children turn out, and most of us would agree with that one too. It's your parents that determine how you're going to turn out. And finally, mothers and fathers parent in the same way. They should act the same way in these two-parent families. And in those cases, all of those stereotypes are false. So let me begin by making my case. Okay, so first we have a historical perspective on parenthood. And we really have basically from the dawn of time, we couldn't have records there, to really the late 19th century, even the beginning of the 20th century. We are in what's called the many births, I've called it no childhood era. Okay, and we have some, historians right here. And one of the classic books by a man named Philippe Ares said that in the past, we treated kids just like many adults. And here you have an example. They would dress a baby in the garb of an adult. These are the royal families. There was really no distinction between children and adults. We had a thing called wet nursing, where rich families would send their baby off to a poor woman to be nursed because they didn't want to be bothered. And this we had even in the United States in the early 20th century. Kids were sent to work. Poor kids at around age 5, they began to work in the mills. We had no child labor laws. Children were treated just like adults. And as long as when they started to work, when they could, basically around age 5 or 6, they sent them off to, help support the family. Worse yet, because so many babies died. I mean, it was, 5 or you had 7 kids and 5 or 6 of them would die. There really wasn't a sense that children had any meaning. So it was perfectly okay to put your child out to die. And what if you're a good parent, you might put them in the hallway of a church, just like we do with dogs sometimes, and put them in the pound, so that maybe they would have a chance of surviving. Okay, so how did we end up where we are today? Well, in the 20th century, we developed a really different idea about children. Now, we had a couple people that talked about that in the Enlightenment in the 15th century, but basically the society developed a whole different idea about what children were. And it started out because of this incredible decline in infant mortality, which happened due to medical advances in the early 20th century. If you listen, life expectancy rose maybe 30 years, mainly because we were able to get rid of infant and childhood diseases somewhat. And parents were able then to think, my baby is actually going to live to be an adult. And I'm able to control how many kids I have, I'm going to have a smaller child family. Basically, in the middle of the 20th century, we began to be a psychology-oriented culture. And I'm blaming our group of psychologists. First, we had early psychologists that talked about how important it was to really nurture your kids. And the major guy here is the influence of Freud, who said, first couple of years of life, as we all know, are the most important in child development. And that ushered in a very big emphasis on what parents do. If I act right, if I'm a good parent, my baby is going to be successful. All of that comes from Freud and other psychologists starting around the mid-20th century. So here we have the end point, which we all know, is that parents are really utterly focused on their children. And we're going to call this, and many people have called it in the past, may have a new name for it now, the helicopter mom. Now, it used to be just upper middle class parents, but it is kind of that image has filtered down to even working class parents. And the mantras here are, parents are totally responsible, just as I said, for how their kids turn out. So mothers particularly must spend as much time possible praising, teaching, and supervising their kids. That's our cultural norm now. So what are some of the fears? Well, one fear is my kid may get kidnapped or killed, so I really have to make sure that they're not unsupervised. Now, when I was 8 or 9 years old, I used to ride my bike into town and no problem. My parents just said, fine, you go out. Today, they could pick up my same parents for child abuse, and we all know that. In fact, they do that. How dangerous is the world? Well, certainly not as dangerous as it was when I was a kid. In fact, it's not dangerous at all. We listen to these stories of so-and-so kidnapped child, but that's really so rare, such a rare event. And we focus on that as the most important danger there. Okay, now we have some realistic dangers, and this is a reality. Realistic economic concerns. My baby must get into the right college to have a shot at the American dream. That is our other cultural norm, because we know that it's harder to do better than your parents. Okay, so here we have born in 1940, 100% of kids ended up doing better than their parents economically. And we move down and it gets worse and worse and worse. And now we have the cohort, that's what we call that, born in 1980. These are kids that are now about 40. Their chance of doing better than their parents is really less than about 40%. Most kids are not going to do better economically than their parents. And we're worried about that. Big economic issues. That pushes us to try to get the kid into absolutely the right school. And there's a misplaced emphasis on protecting self-esteem. Now, let me talk to you a minute about that. First issue is you're not allowed to spank your kids. And interestingly, in many European countries, there's a law that you can't spank your kids. In America, we don't do that because we're an individualistic society, but there's a basic norm. You're not supposed to spank your kids. And now you're not supposed to yell at your kids because that's going to make them feel bad. Not telling you anything you don't know. I can't really yell at my child. They're gonna feel bad about themselves, and really it's gonna mess up their life. Okay, so with the spanking, just as a little aside, most parents in America, shh, don't tell anybody, do spank their kids. And the time, as you might imagine, when that happens is typically when they're toddlers or in preschool. But we don't like that, and it makes us feel very, very nervous. We're really worried about child abuse, but an occasional spanking, don't tell you anything you don't. I don't think it's going to kill your child. Shh, don't tell anybody. Just as a little aside here, one time I was so angry at my son that I hit him. and I happen to be in the street, and a woman comes up to me and says, "You're a bad mother. Don't you ever do that again." So even in the 1980s, that was like a terrible no-no. Okay, but the effect here is that the demands on mothers are really far harder today than they were in the past. So that stereotype that mothers were better in the past is absolutely not true in terms of the demands. We spend more time doing our kids' homework, helping our kids at school, praising our kids for everything they do. And here is the data: daily childcare by mothers in minutes. Every country, 65, it was less. Now it's much more. Canada's much more. France is the only one that's sort of not the same. And it's in a whole interesting issue in itself. Germany, Denmark, Italy, Netherlands, Slovenia, and United States, definitely yes. So we have a more pressured motherhood. Now, adding to that, as we all know, we have the fact that in addition to caring for the kids, most women need to work. And we have the other issue that, in contrast to practically every other country, in fact, every other country, we have single parents tend to live alone. So in the United States, look at it, 23%, we have single parent homes, and we rank higher than any other area of the world. Now, in these areas, it isn't that they don't have single parents, but what happens is they don't live by themselves. We have multi-generational families that really are helping to take care of the kids. It's sort of like you need a village, that kind of thing, but we don't have that idea in the United States. We put women on their own, basically, to take care of the kids, and of course they have to work. So single parents are under an enormous amount of stress there, which explains why the latest phase is the rise of the no-child family. So here's the reasoning. Children are too demanding and they're far too expensive. I didn't give you the cost. We have statistics on that, to raise to adulthood. And I can get the same wonderful feelings of love from my dog. This is the reasoning, and we have it kind of peaking up here in 2007, and then a steady decline in the birth rates of Americans. That's the trend, the decline in birth rates, and that's continuing. So here we have an example of really an upper middle class, lovely couple. They're making a lot of money, and they love each other. And by the way, when you don't have kids, you focus on each other too. So without kids or a stress on your relationship in the family, and they say to themselves, why not just do what we want, and we can have this wonderful dog, and all of our feelings of love can go into each other and the dog, and we don't really need children. And furthermore, most of the myths that we have about parenthood turn out to be wrong. Okay, myth one, having a baby is a total joy. Now, they used to tell me this before I adopted my child. When you see your son's face, you are going to feel so happy. The reality is the first 3 months are the pits. As we learned in our infancy lecture, babies are basically not alive to the world for those 3 months, and it's a whole mechanical process. So you look at your baby and you say, oh my God, this is just a wearing event. Am I really ever going to love my child? That's what a lot of people probably say inside for the first child. And then with the second child, you understand that that gets to be over when the baby wakes up to the world. And we're not allowed to tell anybody. Or we can't say, oh, it's so terrible. I think people say, but you still love them. And the reality is the love tends to kick in when they become alive and become a person. And you have this thing called the dance of attachment, which is a little bit later. Okay, so myth number 2. As a mom, I'm going to be calm and in control. And we all know that that's honored in the breach. Motherhood lets you know that you are not this calm person that you wanted to be, unlike your mom. My mother always yelled at me, and I promise I'm not going to do that with my kids. Well, famous last words. It's very hard because motherhood evokes sadness, Motherhood evokes fury when the kids are acting up, and you end up not being the person that you thought you were going to be before you had kids. Number 3, loving parents produce good children. I think all of us would agree with that. If you are really a good parent, you are going to produce a good child, a loving parent. And this is our image of what it is. But the reality is that it's just as likely that good children like that evoke loving parents. So what we call in psychology is it's a bi-directional relationship. Your child either makes you a good parent or it makes it more difficult for you to be a good parent. Children are different and parents respond differently based on the child's personality. That's life. It's a relationship. And we can't just say it flows in the direction of the parent to the child. Okay, so related to that is our other major myth, and that is that world-class parents produce successful adults. If I am really a good parent, I'm going to produce a successful adult. Okay, so now we're going to give this some major qualifications. First qualification is twin and adoption studies show genetics is crucial in determining who we are. So here we have 2 identical twins, let's say, and this is really the capstone research, adopted into different families. You get them back together again, and they explode your mind as to how similar they are, not just in their looks, but in their preferences, in the things that they're interested in their success. There is practically nothing that is not mainly genetically determined. And I have an adopted son. I'm going to give you a little anecdote. And I know he is much more like his biological mother in temperament, in interests, because I know the mother, than me. And our community, we think of just parents, but really the driver of who we are is much more likely, just as likely to be the community that we live in. And we know this because we say things like, we've got to get my kid out of a bad neighborhood. I've got to get my kid into a better community because they're teaching him bad stuff. You see this as early as preschool. My kid learned to hit from the other kids in the preschool. I don't like the atmosphere there. So we know that intuitively. But we have a couple of theorists here that really spell it out. One of them is Judith Harris, who said, our peer group, look to the peer group, and you're going to find out exactly how the child is being, quote, socialized. Look to their friends. And we also have a man named Raz Chetty, an economist, who looked at what we call upward mobility, which is rising from where your parents were. And Chetty found that there are certain schools that promote upward mobility, and you might be surprised who they are. It's the kind of school where there's a lot of diversity, there's a nurturing environment, and it is not necessarily the fancy school. Much better for values, etc., is a good school in a mixed, economically mixed, and of course it's going to be racially mixed neighborhood. He has a very interesting research on that. Okay, so finally, if I continually praise my child, my baby is going to have high self-esteem. Not true. Self-esteem really comes from succeeding at tasks in life, and we see this very, very early. Not even succeeding, but knowing that you did better. Well, maybe I didn't get an A in the class, but boy, I really struggled and I got a B. Working, see this in elementary school, and succeeding is really the key to having, quote, good self-esteem at any age. And there's a danger in just telling your kid they're wonderful. They're not going to be connected to the real world. That's number one. But number two, they could end up being not a very good person. They're going to find out that, in fact, they're not going to have any friends. Kids that are like that, kids that feel entitled, we know that. It's not a good thing for the kid. Okay, so we went through all of our myths, and now we're going to talk about dads versus moms. Dads and moms, not telling you anything you don't know, but we can scientifically document it, act differently. Here we have the classic dad style. They throw the kid in the air. They run the kid around. They fight with their kid, and kids love their daddies. That's very stimulating. And then you have the nurturer mom. Do your homework. Oh, sweetheart. You can understand right away why a lot of kids say, oh, I want to be with daddy. You know, daddy's so much more fun than mom. And even if he tells me what to do and yells at me, he's much more interesting than mom. That's not true, obviously, with everybody, because every parent differs in how they raise the kids. But the real difference, just in terms of play, is that dads are much more likely to play with their kids than moms. Dads do less childcare than moms do. They still do. And we have the revealing evidence here that during COVID, when neither parent could work, women took over most of the child care. This was during the COVID epidemic. We see here that women are actually doing much more child care than men in the family. And that revealed that gender difference still exists. And we're not going to yell at men because men still have gender stereotype pressures. This is from the Pew Research Center. Most Americans say everybody should be caring and compassionate. That's important for both fathers and mothers. But a man, we still feel, should be able to support the family financially. So we still have that stereotype. It's not as strong as it used to be. And I know many men that I love deeply who were the main caregivers, including my husband, used to care for my son hands-on much more than me. And I have a wonderful nephew who is a terrific father. He's the main caregiver for his kid, and his wife is, working. But in general, that's our stereotype. Men should be the workers. But every parent says family is most important in life. Now that's true of dads and of mothers. So here we have another Pew study. Family time is of top importance for most Americans. Here we have spending time with family is very important, and the others are much, 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 much less important here. This outweighs everything else. Only 8% of people say spending time. I don't know who these people are. What's not a parenthood myth? It's all these myths, mainly negative. And what's not a parenthood myth is children give incredible joy to life. And here we see the dance of attachment with the baby, and how the parents are just thinking to themselves, that was a peak experience, just being with my baby and loving him up. Here we have parenthood when the kid is a little bit older. I love this. Look at how wonderfully she's doing. And we're just collaborating on loving our baby here, loving our, I would say, elementary school kid. And she's wonderful. And of course, here we have dads with sons who like to love them up too. If you think back, those of you who are parents, to the days that you really, really thought were better than anything else, it's those kinds of peak experiences that make being a parent incredibly worthwhile. Children, if you're lucky, and it's mainly true, are the gift that keeps on giving for your whole life. So here we have an older little girl, an older daughter, and with her father. Here we have an adult man with his mother. Oh, Mom, it's Mother's Day. That's why we have Mother's Day. I love you. You're the best mom in the world. I'm telling you, as a mother, being told that on Mother's Day, it's like it sets me up for the whole year. And then we have, of course, grandparenthood. And in my cohort, people my age, there's nothing more important than being a grandparent. It's like a peak experience. And many of us move to be close to their grandkids just so they can have that wonderful peak life experience. Children are also the rock that we can count on to help us when we're having physical trouble, when we're frail. All of this stuff doesn't happen with all children. But the fact of the matter is your children are going to step in and help you if you need help. Now, they're not going to live with you, but they're going to try to search out a place, just like we did when our kids were little babies, that's going to be right for us and help us negotiate that final task of life, which is, moving around and really living the best that we can with our frailties. Okay, so here we have facts about family caregivers. There are 43.5 million unpaid. Naturally, most of them are women. They spend at least half of a month caring, doing some caregiving for a relative or parent. And this is really important. 90% call that experience worthwhile, that people feel this is something I have to do and this is worthwhile. I want to take care of my parents, even though it's stressful and it can be overwhelming. Okay. And it can be somewhat expensive. So children are not abandoning their elderly in the United States. Now, let me kind of sum things up here. Parenthood, as I've mentioned, can be a pinnacle life experience. That's absolutely true. If you don't buy into the myths that you control the outcome, which is the production, which is your child, and you don't buy into the inflated expectations that you always have to be nice, you can't yell at your kid ever. We all know this. Parents, we're normal people. We tend to have favorites. We're not Madonnas. We're not godlike. We're normal human beings. And we really just, the main thing is that we need to love our kids and we need to enjoy the incredible sense of meaning that children provide, apart from the day-to-day hassles. Just focus on the meaningful experiences that you're having with your kids. Be loving, but you and your children are doomed to failure if your main goal is to preserve their self-esteem, because frankly, life will teach them the knocks of life, what it's really like. And people who have high self-esteem are going to have low self-esteem at some points in their life. That's what living is about. In a two-parent family, don't expect your partner to act exactly the same as you. Everybody has different discipline styles. And, I gave you the gender one, but it's true if you have if you have a gay marriage, as long as you have a partner who's involved, they may have a very different discipline style. Now, there are some that are not so good, but in a lot of cases, it's good to have different discipline styles. That's making for a more full experience for the kids. Mainly, understanding your child's personality and putting them in the right environment to express their strengths is the parenting practice that works best. So the best thing you can do is be loving and make sure that your child, as much as you can, you're going to fail because not every environment is child friendly, but if you understand your child, try to get them in the right environment to express who they are. This is my final advice from my personal experience and, of course, from the scientific literature. If your son or daughter is in trouble at age 2 or 25, take the long picture and say, it ain't over until it's over. The real key to being a world-class parent is not, is my child succeeding, but am I the rock that's hanging in when things go wrong? And we can see this all around us. Particularly with when a child goes to jail, you see the families going to visit, you see the mothers. I mean, that's like a tug at our heartstrings. My son or my daughter is in jail, but I'm going to go visit. I love my baby. Same thing is true if your kid has, something like Asperger's syndrome, or has a psychological problem. I'm going to hang in with my baby as long as I can. And really, it ain't over until it's over, because people change as they get older. You know this from your own life, and I know it from my own life. And actually, I know it from my son's own life. So I'll tell you that after I, alert you to my Belsky Being Human website. because I have lectures on growing up, growing old, big questions, and being human, and everything you wanted to know about human life, because I've lived it and I've been writing textbooks for about 50 years. So now I'm going to tell you about my son, Thomas, okay? My son, Thomas, who's adopted, and I said he's a lot like his biological mother, his temperament, was really a bad child. I can tell you, he had dyslexia. He couldn't do well in school. He failed at everything. He ran away from home. I put him in boot camp, and I remember he was one of the worst kids in the boot camp. And I really thought, we're going to be in big trouble. He had DUIs, and he couldn't hold down a job in his 20s. But when he got to be about 30, by accident, I had a little hand in this, we helped him get a job that was just right for his talents. And he is enormously successful now at 40. I'm enormously proud of him. And I never thought, and neither did my husband, who happened to die before Thomas was 30, we really hoped for Thomas, but we didn't expect that things would get this way for him. So always people change if they are in the right situation for what their particular talents are. And next case is we go along to work, where we're talking about that same issue. Putting yourself into the right environment is the key to successful living and being successful at that other core job of yours as an adult, which is to find a satisfying career.